Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
So you sent over a really great batch of sources, all focused on the Cold War.
Yeah, fascinating period.
Absolutely. And what we really want to dig into today is how the U.S. and the Soviet Union actually managed to exert all that influence, across the globe back then.
Right. It wasn't just about having big armies, it was about the how.
Exactly. We're looking at the sources on military blocks, that whole nuclear situation, and the proxy wars.
Mm,
You ever think about how strange it was? Two superpowers locked in this massive global fight, but without their main armies directly going head to head on a huge scale.
it's the defining feature, isn't it? This constant tension, this competition, but always pulling back from the brink of direct war. Your sources really lay out the main strategies they used.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe the military alliances.
Sounds good. That's fundamental. Your sources talk about the Soviet bloc or the communist bloc really taking shape.
Yeah, and it sounds like it wasn't just, countries being friendly. The Soviets were pretty active in setting up communist governments in Eastern Europe, governments that answered to Moscow, right?
Oh, very much so. It was about creating a sphere of influence, a buffer zone. These governments were closely tied politically, economically to the Soviet Union.
Which kind of stifled their own paths for a long time.
Definitely a legacy that, still has echoes today in some places. And understandably, this made the West pretty nervous.
Which, okay, leads straight into NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That was the West's response.
Framed as a mutual defense alliance.
And the core idea, the sources really hammer this home, was that attack on one is an attack on all thing.
That's the classic collective security principle. It's meant to deter aggression because an attacker faces not just one country, but, well, the whole alliance.
Makes sense, but then the Soviets, they didn't just sit back, they formed their own version.
Exactly. Took a few years, but in 1955, they formally created the Warsaw Pact, their counter-alliance.
Right, the Warsaw Pact. So now you've got these two huge armed camps basically staring each other down.
Across Europe primarily, but the tension was global.
The sources really stress how setting up these alliances just ratcheted up the Cold War tension. It feels like everyone was constantly on edge.
It solidified the bipolar world. Two opposing sides, heavily armed. Even if NATO said it was defensive, from the Soviet perspective, any military buildup looked like a threat.
Yeah, you can see how that would fuel suspicion. It's like a security dilemma.
Precisely. And that kind of leads us naturally into the next big area your sources cover, the nuclear dimension.
Ah, yes, nuclear proliferation, the arms race. Sounds like just an incredibly expensive and frankly terrifying competition.
It was an unprecedented race for more and more destructive power. The U.S. had the atomic bomb first,
We
obviously.
used it at 45.
Right. Then the Soviets tested their own in 1949. And that really changed the game. The arms race was truly on.
Because now both sides had this unthinkable weapon.
And each side saw the other's capability as, well, an existential threat. So the drive was relentless: build more, build better, build bigger.
And then came the H-bomb, the hydrogen bomb. Your sources say the U.S. got that in 51?
1951, yes. And it was, orders of magnitude more powerful than the first atomic bombs. Just a staggering jump in destructive force.
It's hard to even imagine.
It really is. And predictably, the Soviets weren't far behind. They tested their own H-bomb in 1953.
So within just a few years, both superpowers had weapons capable of, well, mutual destruction.
That's the chilling term they use, mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The idea that a nuclear war was unwinnable because both sides would be annihilated. It created this balance of terror.
Which brings us to maybe the most terrifying moment your sources highlight.
Mm-hmm.
The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. This feels like where it almost all went wrong.
It's generally considered the closest the world came to actual nuclear war. Yeah.
Can you walk us through what happened? The sources mention the context of a failed U.S. attempt to overthrow Castro in Cuba.
Right. The Bay of Pigs invasion had failed the year before. So against that backdrop, the Soviet leader, Khrushchev, decided to secretly put medium and intermediate range nuclear missiles in Cuba.
Why? Just to protect Cuba.
That was part of it, deterring another U.S. invasion. But also, strategically, it was a way to counter U.S. missiles that were already placed in Turkey, right on the Soviet border.
Ah, okay. Yeah, the sources mention the Turkey missiles. That's important context. Sometimes that gets left out. So, Soviets putting missiles in Cuba, America's backyard, essentially. How did the U.S. find out?
Spy planes. U-2 spy planes flying over Cuba took photos in October '62 showing missile sites being built.
And the reaction in the U.S.?
Immediate alarm. outrage.
President Kennedy and his advisors, they debated options, invasion, airstrikes, but settled on a naval blockade, or quarantine as they called it, around Cuba.
To stop more Soviet ships carrying weapons.
Exactly, and that kicked off those famous 13 days.
Intense. The sources describe global fear, people genuinely thinking nuclear war was about to happen. It was incredibly tense, a direct standoff. Lots of back-channel diplomacy happening, immense pressure, but the risk of a mistake, an accident. It was terrifyingly real.
But thankfully it didn't happen. How did it end?
Eventually, a deal was struck. Publicly, the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba under UN observation. In return, the U.S. pledged not to invade Cuba.
And privately.
Privately, the U.S. also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, though that part wasn't announced at the time.
So both sides backed down. But wow, what a close call.
A huge wake-up call. Your sources are right to emphasize it as this stark reminder of the dangers. It really spurred efforts towards arms control.
Leading to things like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Exactly. The NPT came along in 1968. The goal was to stop the spread of nukes to countries that didn't already have them. A major step, though. Proliferation is still a concern today.
Okay, so we've got alliances creating tension, nuclear weapons creating this terrifying standoff. What's the third main way influence was exerted, according to the sources?
Proxy wars. This is where the competition gets outsourced, you could say.
Indirect fighting.
Pretty much. Instead of fighting each other directly, the U.S. and Soviet Union would back opposing sides in smaller regional conflicts. This happened all over the place: Africa, Asia, Latin America.
And the sources point out these often had devastating consequences for the countries actually involved, right? It wasn't just a game for the superpowers.
Absolutely not. These wars often tore countries apart, fueled existing tensions, or created new ones, with legacies that lasted, and in some cases still last, long after the Cold War ended.
Your sources give three main examples. Let's start with the Korean War. That seems like a pretty clear-cut case.
It really is. After World War II, Korea gets divided. North Korea, backed by the Soviets, becomes communist. South Korea, backed by the U.S.
And then the North invades the South in 1950.
Right, trying to unify the peninsula under communism. The U.S., operating under a UN resolution, sends troops to defend the South. The Soviets, meanwhile, provide weapons, training, air support, but crucially, not their own ground troops fighting Americans directly.
So they're fueling the conflict, directing it, but letting Koreans do the actual fighting against other Koreans in UN forces.
That's the proxy element. It ends in 1953, basically a stalemate. The border hardly moved, but millions died. A brutal illustration.
Okay, second example. The Angolan Civil War, starting around 75. This one seems maybe more complex. Colonialism is involved.
Yeah, the roots are deeper. Angola was a Portuguese colony. Like many places in Africa, its borders were drawn by European powers, lumping different ethnic groups together.
It's a Berlin Conference legacy.
Exactly. These groups initially united to fight Portugal for independence, which they got in 1975. But then, who takes power? That led to internal conflict almost immediately.
And the superpowers saw an opportunity.
They did. The Soviets and Cubans backed one major faction, the MPLA. The U.S. and significantly apartheid South Africa backed rival groups, like UNITA.
So a local power struggle gets sucked into the global Cold War.
Completely. It became another arena for the U.S.-Soviet rivalry, and the war dragged on for decades, causing immense suffering long after the Cold War itself was over.
And the last example from the sources, Nicaragua in the 80s, the Contra War.
Right. You had the Sandinistas, a socialist group, take power in 1979, overthrowing a dictator.
And the U.S. wasn't happy about socialism in its backyard.
Pretty much. The Reagan administration saw it as Soviet-Cuban expansionism in the Western Hemisphere. So the U.S. heavily funded and trained anti-Sandinista rebels, known as the Contras.
While the Soviets supported the Sandinista government.
Correct. Another proxy conflict. And your sources do note the Contras were accused of significant human rights abuses in their fight against the Sandinistas.
It highlights the human cost again, doesn't it, for the people actually living through these conflicts?
It really does. These weren't just moves on a geopolitical chessboard. They had devastating real-world impacts. Eventually, there was a ceasefire, and the Sandinistas lost power in an election later on.
Okay, so let's just recap the main takeaways from the sources. We've got the U.S. and Soviet Union maintaining influence through, one, these big military alliances like NATO and the Warsaw Pact, keeping tension high.
Yep, constant state of alert.
Two, the nuclear arms race, leading to that terrifying MAD-D doctrine and moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The threat of annihilation always looming.
And three, channeling their rivalry into these proxy wars all over the globe, funding and arming different sides in local conflicts.
Right. Avoiding direct superpower war, but exporting conflict elsewhere.
And it's crucial to remember, as the sources imply, these strategies, while preventing a direct U.S.-Soviet war, had massive, often devastating long-term consequences for many other parts of the world.
Absolutely. The impacts were profound and are still felt today in many ways.
Thinking about all this, the alliances, the nuclear brinkmanship, the proxy fighting, it does make you wonder, even though the Cold War as we knew it is over, how much do we see echoes of these kinds of influence strategies playing out in global power struggles today?
That's a really important question to ask. The context is different, sure. No single ideological battle like capitalism versus communism in the same way, but the methods. Strategic alliances, competition for resources and influence, indirect involvement in regional conflicts. You could certainly argue there are parallels in today's multipolar world.
And given how close things got, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis, what's maybe the most crucial lesson leaders today should take away from that, knowing nuclear weapons still exist?
I think it has to be the absolute paramount importance of communication. Clear, direct, even back-channel communication. And diplomacy, even with adversaries. Plus, a willingness to de-escalate, to step back from the edge. The crisis showed just how easily things could spiral out of control due to miscalculation or accident. The stakes with nuclear weapons are just too high for anything less.